Diminished seventh chords. They're one of my favorite kinds of chords. They're generally used to build tension. Sometimes that tension can just be for a moment and it resolves quickly in some kind of nice way. Something like that. They can resolve a few different ways, but sometimes that tension just gets resolved immediately. But other times you have a whole bunch of these things. This is the classic example from a melodrama when the villain's tying the heroine to the railroad tracks. You just keep going up one diminished seventh chord at a time. So eventually the hero comes in and saves the day with some kind of major chord probably. But diminished seventh chord. So they're generally used to build tension. They're very unstable chords. They're unresolved. They want to go somewhere. You play it, and it just, like a lot of the notes feel like they need to move. Anyway, the first way I learned to play a diminished seventh chord was like this. So it's the first fret of the fourth string, second fret of the third string, first fret of the second string, and second fret of the first string. I'm using these fingers here. And this is actually 4 different diminished seventh chords. One interesting thing about diminished seventh chords is you can name them after any note in the chord. You can think of any note, any of those 4 notes, you can think of it as the root of the chord. So you can think of it as a D sharp diminished seventh chord. You can think of it as an A diminished seventh chord. You can think of it as a C diminished seventh chord. You can think of it as an F sharp diminished seventh chord. You can think of it as any of those notes could be the root of the chord. The reason for this is that the diminished seventh chord is built on an even division of an octave. If you play a note and go up 3 frets, and then go up 3 more frets, and then go up 3 more frets, those are the 4 notes that make up the diminished seventh chord. And then if you go up 3 more frets, you're back where you started. So you keep going up those 3 frets, and you end up right back where you started. So you could start on the G instead of the E, and you'd end up with the same 4 notes. You'd have E, G, B flat, D flat, E. You'd have the same 4 notes. You'd have G, B flat, D flat, E, G. You could start on any of those notes, and if you follow that pattern, you'd end up with the same 4 notes. So you've got this diminished seventh chord here. If you start on the first fret, you'd have another diminished seventh chord. If you start here, you'd have another diminished seventh chord, but then this one is actually the same 4 notes as that first one. So I hope that makes some sense. But because of this, there are only 3 different diminished seventh chords. You play this one, you play this one, you play this one, and each of those has 4 different notes. But then you play this one, and it's actually the same 4 notes that you started with here. So this is D sharp, A, C, F sharp. This is F sharp, C, D sharp, A. So you're playing the same 4 notes, but they're just in a different order. And you can go up 3 more frets, and same thing happens. Each of those has the same 4 notes in it, just mixed up in a different order. So you could be playing along. If I put this A in the bass, if we're thinking of it as A diminished seventh chord, that'll help you continue to hear it as A diminished seventh. So I'm just kind of demonstrating that right now. But a lot of the time you'll hear jazz rhythm guitar players that when one of those chords comes up, because you can just take anything that goes with that chord and just move it up 3 frets and move it up another 3 frets, and gives you an easy way to play something that sounds fancy and cool. Say we're on let's see, what should we do? let's say we're on a B flat chord, and then the chord goes to A diminished seventh. Instead of just playing it here, you can play it there, and then go back to the B flat. So it's B flat, A diminished seventh, and then back to B flat. Or you could do this. If you have the chord lasting a little bit longer. So that's pretty neat, I think. That creates a whole lot of possibilities for things you can do. You could also, if you're playing a solo, so you can just pick out one note at a time and then just slide it up 3 frets, slide it up 3 more frets. That'll give you some cool ideas. So that's the diminished 7th chord. There are really only 3 ways that I'm likely to strum a diminished 7th chord. There's this one that I just showed you. I play this one a lot. This is with a root on the 6th string. So it's the 2nd fret of the 6th string, and then I'm flattening out my first finger to cover. This is the 2nd and the 4th strings, and it's also covering the 3rd string, but I'm adding this 3rd finger here on the 2nd fret of the 3rd string. And the 5th string and the 1st string are muted here. So this one kind of connects to this one, so you can see how they fit together. But I usually tend to think of this as an F sharp diminished 7th chord because that's in the bass. A lot of the time these are named after the note that's in the bass. Although it's more correct usually to refer to them based on how they resolve. I won't go into that today, but for now we can just talk about them based on what note's in the bass. So think of this, you can think of this as an F sharp diminished 7th chord. But you can also think of all these as F sharp diminished 7th chords. So that's 2 shapes that I use. Another shape that I use is this. So this is with a root on the 5th string. So this is a 3rd fret of the 5th string, 4th fret of the 4th string, 2nd fret of the 3rd string, and 4th fret of the 2nd string. And then I mute the 1st string, and if you want you can mute that 6th string with your thumb. So I might think of this as C diminished 7th because it has that C in the bass. But it's the same notes as this F sharp. Same chord, just using those 3 shapes and that trick of moving it up 3 frets at a time. So that's pretty cool, I think, diminished 7th chords. And a couple ways that they're frequently used in jazz and in Great American Songbook type tunes is you might be on a chord, and then you might go to the diminished 7th chord of that same note. So you might be on a G, and then go to a G diminished 7th chord. A lot of songs use that. That's something you could use that as a basis of one of your songs. A lot of times it'll also do this. You might go down, or usually don't go back and forth like that in this context, but a lot of songs involve being on the diminished 7th chord, a fret lower, and then moving up. So F sharp diminished 7th to G. Now there are a few chord progressions that come up a lot as well. So you might be on G sharp diminished 7th chord, then A minor 7, and then D7. A lot of songs do that. And if you don't know these fancy chords, you could do it this way: G sharp, A minor 7 down here, D7. And actually G sharp, you can take it down to open position as well. You can play a G sharp diminished 7th chord down here. Open, 1st fret, open, 1st fret. And that would be like this. another progression that comes up a lot would be G, B flat diminished 7th chord, A minor 7, D7. So that's pretty similar. So the first one was, and the second one was, they're almost interchangeable there. A lot of the time I might sometimes use one progression in the same song and sometimes use the other one. I might interchange them. But really what's going on here is this diminished 7th chord is acting as this passing chord between these two chords. So there's this movement where you're playing a G and you're making your way to the A minor 7 by hitting this other chord in the middle. So both of these, whether you're going to the G sharp diminished 7th chord or the B flat diminished 7th chord, they both have this nice resolution to that A minor 7. They both kind of move in the same way. So a lot of the time when I'm playing a song, I don't necessarily know what all the chords are, or I don't have really specific ideas for what all the chords are, but I might know what kind of movement the song has. I might know that it's moving in this direction towards that chord, so I throw in whatever path I want to get to that chord. But a good way to start doing that is just to learn a few of these different kinds of movements. And these are all, you could think of both of these as kind of similar to this. If you go to if you go from G to E7 to A minor 7 to D7, like these are kind of taking the place of an E7 in this kind of progression: G, E7, A minor 7, D7. So let's see, that's a bit about diminished 7th chords. I'd recommend becoming familiar with these three shapes, and then you can throw them into songs when you want to play them. And diminished 7th chord is written a few different ways. Sometimes it's written with a little circle and then a 7th, or then a 7. If you see like E, little circle, 7, that's an E diminished 7th chord. Sometimes it's written, sometimes in jazz tunes they just write diminished, and that means diminished 7th. If they're not being more specific than that, a lot of the time you can just assume I'll play a diminished 7th. But that little circle, sometimes it's DIM. They might just write DIM or DIM 7, and that means diminished 7th. What are some other things? Sometimes you'll see a line through that little circle, or it might say minor 7 flat 5. And those two things mean this other chord, which isn't exactly the same. It's got 3 notes in common. It's this chord. So this chord that I was just showing you is the fully diminished 7th chord. That minor 7 flat 5 is a half diminished 7th chord. I guess that's a lesson for another time. So start by just learning these 3 diminished 7th chords, and think about how they're used and how you can play them. I guess one other thing before I go, the diminished 7th chord arpeggio. This is really cool. So you can play this if you on every string you're going to be moving up 3 frets. So on the 6th string you'll start on the 1st, go to the 4th. On the 5th string you'll start on the 2nd, go to the 5th. 3rd, go to the 6th. 4th, go to the 7th. And here we skip a fret. 6th, go to the 9th. 7, go to the 10th. So that's a cool pattern, and you can come up with little patterns like that within that pattern, and they can sound really cool in solos. So I'd recommend practicing that as well. And anything you do with this shape, you can move it up 3 frets. Just always remember that. Alright, have a good day.